Hey everybody, Crow back again with another Evercade video. This time we're going to be looking at the Oliver Twins collection. Although this could have been called the Dizzy collection because out of the 11 games on this thing, 8 of them are Dizzy games or Dizzy spin-off games in a way. And yeah, I guess the Oliver Twins has had a long history making games, mostly starting out with the British home computers. In fact, almost all these games started out on a home computer of some kind, and what is on this cartridge is actually the NES versions of those games. They eventually got ported over to the NES one way or another. I guess that just kind of made it easy for emulation because it may be difficult to emulate different computers, I guess, on the Evercade and maybe in the future. But yeah, what we are getting are all NES games on this thing, mostly Dizzy games, as I said. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and talk about each one of these, and I'm going to give it a rating between 1 and 5. A 5 is what I consider to be a great game, a game that I wouldn't want to change, much about, and I had a lot of fun with. A 4 is what I consider to be a good game. It's a game I still had a lot of fun with, but there are some things here and there I felt could change to make it even better. A 3 is what I'd consider to be an okay game. It's a game that I'm kind of on the fence about. I neither liked it nor disliked it, just kind of meh in the middle kind of thing. A 2 is what I'd consider to be a poor game. It's a game I really didn't have a lot of fun with, but I could see some value going back and playing every once in a while. And a 1 is what I consider a flat out bad game. It's a game that I don't know why it's on the cartridge. It's no fun at all, and I just don't want to go back to playing it. And it's very rare that I give any game a bad rating, at least even on the Evercade. I think it's only happened a handful of times. And again, this is just my own personal preferences, my own, I'm not going for a common consensus here, just my own personal opinion on each of these. All right. I'm going to do something I haven't done before, and I'm going to stop the video right here and talk about my history with the Dizzy games and the Oliver Twins collections, because you see, there really is none. The Dizzy franchise and the Oliver Twins, I guess, were very popular in the UK, but you see, I'm from the United States, and the whole series was kind of invisible to me. Yeah, sure. I've heard of the NES titles, the one game that was on the Quattro cartridge. I think that was Treasure Island Dizzy. And I actually happen to have a copy of Fantastic Adventures of Dizzy right here. And I actually never played it. Actually, this is my wife's cartridge, and it was kind of just sitting upstairs the whole time, which is why I kind of was blind to it. It's not even listed in my collection. But I really didn't know anything about the Dizzy games until I started to look up these games. Before I started playing them on the Evercade. You see, I wanted to play these games kind of in the order they came out. So I had some sort of timeline of how these games played out. And that was not an easy feat. In fact, I probably didn't get it 100% correct. I mean, I knew kind of vaguely what order to play the games in. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because this whole next section where I'm talking about the games, I didn't play, normally I would just play the games in the order that they appear on the Evercade, but I knew that wasn't the right way to do it this time, because I don't know what order they are in the Evercade, at least on the cartridge. And so I'm going to play first the Dizzy games in order. And basically what I did was I'd play a game, and then I'd kind of record my audio and based on what I thought about the game, and then move on to the next game. So that's what you're going to see coming up, is just me talking about one game and then moving on to the next. And it's just kind of like in chronological order. So when I talk about the first game, I hadn't played any of the other ones yet. So just something I wanted to kind of explain before we get into talking about the game. So let's get back to the video. So with all that being said, let's jump into our first game. The first game on the card I played was Treasure Island Dizzy, and this was the second game in the Dizzy series, though this is the first one to be released on the NES. The funny thing I found is that if you try to search for the NES version of this game on GameFAQs, you won't find it. That's because this game was originally released as one of the 4 games in the Quattro Adventures game cartridge, aka the Super Adventure Quests in Europe. And yes, this is a platforming adventure game that firmly has its roots in the early home computers at the time. And the NES port does nothing to hide this fact. This is a very, very difficult game. I only played all the way through it because the Evercade has save states, and I used a walkthrough on GameFAQs. If I didn't have those two things, I wouldn't have played this game for very long. I have a laundry list of issues with this game. One hit and you're dead. Game over. No exceptions. And I find some of the hit detection to be suspect. Now this may be forgivable, and save states do help with this issue, but I could not imagine playing this game on original hardware, and keep this in mind as I cycle through my other issues. Secondly, the screens do not scroll, and this is likely due to a limitation of the original home computers the game was developed for. But because of this, the screen will switch to a new screen and sometimes put you right on an enemy or something else that'll kill you, and game over. Thirdly, there are a few traps that will also get you from off screen. Unless you already know about them, game over. And lastly, the absolute worst thing about this game is the item management. This is an adventure game where you need to pick up and use items throughout, but you can only hold 3 items. Not only that, but picking up items, using items, and dropping items are all done with one button. So if you pick up 3 items and hit the button, you'll either drop or use the item at the top of the list depending on whether it can be used or not. The most ridiculous thing about all this is that a lot of the game takes place underwater, and you need to have the snorkel in your inventory to survive underwater. But if the snorkel happens to be at the top of your inventory and you press the button to pick something up, you drop the snorkel and instantly die. Even if you have extra space in your inventory. This is the most ridiculous item management I have ever seen in a game. It turns out that managing the items you need to carry turns it into its own puzzle. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but it's the most annoying thing about the whole game. Also, because your inventory is only limited to 3 items, even if you know when and where to use every item, you'll find yourself running all over all the screens, dropping off and picking up items for each task you need to accomplish. Now, I won't spoil the ending of the game here, but I thought it was funny that you could even kill yourself even after completing the game. And after I was done playing, I was thinking about giving this game a 3 and saying it was just okay. But as I'm sitting here talking about it and thinking about the one-hit game overs and the absolutely terrible item management, even if it is a puzzle, I think I've got to give this a 2, giving it a poor. I just hope that the games get better from here. Next up, I'll talk about The Fantastic Adventures of Dizzy, which was the next Dizzy game to appear on the NES. And the really interesting thing I found out about this one is that there's actually 2 different versions of this game on the NES. There was a standard Camerica Gold cartridge, not licensed by Nintendo, which I happen to have a copy of myself right here. And there was a version made for the Aladdin Deck Enhancer, which I really won't go into many details here, but it was a way for Camerica to sell cheaper game cartridges by having the common chips in the Aladdin Deck Enhancer itself, allowing them to sell smaller game cartridges that plugged into it that only contained the game's ROM. Well, it turns out that this Evercade cartridge has the Aladdin Deck Enhancer version of the game, and thankfully, it's the better version of the game from what I read. These aren't small differences either. The standard release has 100 stars to collect, while the Aladdin version has 250. Item placement is also different, and the Aladdin version even has items the standard release didn't have, and best of all, the inventory management was improved. There's also a Genesis/Mega Drive version of this game as well, and I don't know why that version wasn't included in this collection, unless they just wanted to keep all the games the NES versions. But I'm a little off base here. Let's talk about the game itself. The Fantastic Adventures of Dizzy plays a lot like Treasure Island Dizzy. It's a side-scrolling platforming adventure game wherein you need to pick up objects and use them to solve puzzles to unlock new areas and proceed throughout the game. The game has many improvements over Treasure Island Dizzy and is much more enjoyable to play. Dizzy actually has lives now, and there's the ability to earn more by solving these slide puzzle games found throughout the game, and they're actually quite easy. And not just lives, but Dizzy can now take damage before he dies, although certain obstacles are still an instant death. But this game is also littered with fruit that can be eaten to take away Dizzy's damage, making the collision with the enemies far less concerning. Also, no longer are there static screens. The screens now scroll left and right, although screens will still change when ascending or descending levels. and the item management is still kind of the same, but it's at the same time much improved. Dizzy can still only hold 3 items, and picking up, using items, and dropping items are all still done with one button, but it's implemented so much better here, mainly because hitting the button once will no longer drop an item if you want to pick one up and there's still room in your inventory. I found the exploration and experimentation with the items in the game to be pretty fun. It's pretty fair in its problem solutions, and even though I haven't finished the game, most of what I've seen makes sense. There are even little mini games that break things up, like the minecart ride or riding a barrel down a river. I feel like this game can take a really long time to complete though. You can only carry 3 items at a time, so you may run into a situation where you want to try an object on something, but you've got to run back to get it, if you can even remember where in the game world you left it. Fortunately, with the Evercade, the save states are here and they'll keep you covered. Now, I didn't know whether or not I should give this game a 4 or a 5, but I've got to say that this is a great game and I'm going to give it a 5. The only thing that was holding me back was the fact that you can only hold 3 items, but I feel like the game might have been too easy if you could carry everything at once, like a regular point-and-click adventure game. And after playing the game for several hours, there's nothing in the game that made me want to change anything about the game. I like it just the way it was, so that's why I think I gotta stick with giving it a great score. Game 3 I'll talk about is Go Dizzy Go! This NES version of the game was originally released as part of the Quattro arcade game cartridge that was released in 1992 and is actually an updated version of a previous Dizzy game that was originally released for home computers, and that was called Quick Snacks. As a change of pace from the previous 2 titles I talked about, this is a simple puzzle game wherein Dizzy runs around a single screen maze eating all the fruit to advance to the next level. The levels are otherwise comprised of movable blocks, immovable blocks, and enemies that roam the screens. If you want bonus points, you can eat the fruits on screen in the order that they flash, which is much easier said than done, especially in later levels since the next fruit that flashes is usually never near the last one you collected. Extra points can also be earned by squishing enemies with a movable block, although they will always reappear on screen. There are hidden secrets to be found throughout the game, with a note usually appearing on each level that'll help you find them. And while you play, extra points and power-ups will appear to help you out if you can grab them in time. It's a decent game, but I don't like how the graphics for movable and immovable blocks change every level. It always throws me off, and sometimes I'd forget which was which. There are bonus stages in the game wherein the floor is ice and there are no monsters, but you have a very limited amount of time to collect all the fruit. They aren't bad for bonus levels, though I think the time limit on them is extremely tight and they happen after every level. Personally, I think they should be a little bit more sparsely put throughout the game. It's an interesting game. Kind of reminds me of something like a mix between Pac-Man and Pango, but there are some things I feel make the game a little less fun than it could have been, so I'm going to give this one a good rating of 4. The 4th game I'll talk about here is Dizzy the Adventurer. This NES version of the game is a remake of another Dizzy game that was originally released on home computers, which was called Dizzy, Prince of the Yoke Folk. And fun fact, the game was only ever originally released for use with Camerica's Aladdin Deck Enhancer. And now we're back to a regular Dizzy adventure game here, and the plot is that an evil wizard had put a spell on a spinning wheel hoping to get rid of Dizzy, but his girlfriend Daisy is the one that touches it and she falls into a deep sleep. A troll then captures Dizzy and throws him into a prison, and that's where the game starts. You've got to escape and find Daisy to give her a kiss to wake her up. And if this sounds familiar, yeah, you're not mistaken. This is practically the plot of Sleeping Beauty. So after I'd played the first 2 Dizzy adventure games, I was pretty much prepared for what to expect from the third. Another game where Dizzy runs from screen to screen, picking up objects and using them to grant access to new areas or to obtain new objects. This game no longer has the scrolling screens of the Fantastic Adventures of Dizzy, but I really don't think it hurts the game at all. The health bar has been removed as well, but again, it really doesn't matter as there's no more creatures roaming around the screens that can hurt you. Hell, even the background candle flames don't hurt you anymore. You still have a stock of lives, so getting yourself killed once doesn't instantly end the game either. Although with using save states, this is hardly an issue anyway. Another big improvement is that the characters will actually have dialogue with one another, and that'll help you out with what items they want, or they may give you hints on other parts of the game. The biggest improvement in this game made over the previous two is how the inventory system works. Dizzy is still limited to holding 3 items at a time, but when you try and pick up a 4th item, the game tells you don't have any more room and he just doesn't pick it up, instead of dropping the item at the top of your inventory while it's picking up the new item. Also, you can actually select the item you want to use or drop instead of having to juggle items around and making sure that the item you want to use is at the top of your inventory list. Finally, Dizzy is using a normal inventory system. It's a big improvement. Now, this game doesn't feel as big as the Fantastic Adventures of Dizzy, and it no longer has all those mini games as well. You know, this might be a good thing since you don't have to backtrack as much to pick up items you may have left behind, but that does mean this is a far shorter and more straightforward game than the Fantastic Adventures. I don't really think it's a bad thing, just a different type of adventure, one that's not so vast. I mean, this game has 50 stars to collect compared to the 250 in the Fantastic Adventures. But because the game is smaller, it certainly doesn't make it less of a game. The improvements and changes made in this game actually make it more enjoyable to play, I feel, and though it may be shorter, I still gotta say this is a great game and give it a 5. Alright, so the last game I talked about, Dizzy the Adventurer, was the last game to actually be released for the NES back in the 90s. But it turned out that the Oliver twins had made more Dizzy games for the NES, usually remakes of other home computer Dizzy titles, but these games were never fully completed or published. Then, sometime in the 2010s, the Oliver twins had rediscovered these games and had started releasing them, starting with this one, Wonderland Dizzy, in 2015. Wonderland Dizzy is a remake of an earlier home computer game called Magicland Dizzy, the main difference being that Wonderland Dizzy now has many references to Alice in Wonderland. So yes, this is another standard Dizzy adventure game, and the story is that all of the Yolk folk had just disappeared, and it's up to Dizzy and Daisy to find them. They somehow know that by jumping into this seemingly bottomless hole, they'll be able to find them. When they do, they wind up in Wonderland, and in order to leave, they have to rescue all of their friends and collect all 100 stars to be able to head back home with everybody. The gameplay is pretty much exactly like the last game, Dizzy the Adventurer. Non-scrolling static screens, can only carry 3 items, and proper inventory management. I'd even say the length of the game is the same. The major difference here is that you can play as Dizzy and Daisy, but not how you would think. You can switch between the characters, but only if the character you're controlling takes a hit or falls from a great distance. Then the Cheshire Cat appears and takes all the items that character is holding and gives it to the other character wherever they are. It's an interesting mechanic, and if you work out the character positions as you play, you can save yourself the trouble of lengthy trips around the map to solve puzzles. The thing I was initially confused about was that every time the Cheshire Cat appeared, he tells you how many lives you have left, even if you haven't lost a life. This made me think that touching birds, tiny fish, and caterpillars were killing my character, when in reality they were just being knocked dizzy, and that's enough for the game to switch characters on you. And that's fine, it's just a bit unusual. I mean, we could have just pushed the select button to change characters instead of running into small critters, but what do I know? If you don't want to worry about switching characters, the game will also let you play as Dizzy or Daisy alone. And hell, the game even has an easy mode, and as far as I can tell, it's the same as the regular mode, it's just that you never actually lose a life. Though with the Evercade save state functionality, there's really no point in playing the game that way. As I said before, the game is very similar to Dizzy the Adventurer in terms of length, difficulty, and entertainment in my opinion. And since I thought that game was great, I kind of have to give this one the same rating as well. The next game I'll be looking at here is Dreamworld Pogie. a spin-off Dizzy game that features Pogie, Dizzy's pet, in a full-on action side-scrolling platforming game. The game was originally supposed to be published around 1993, but it was abandoned so the Oliver twins could work on Dizzy the Adventurer instead. In 2011, a prototype ROM of the uncompleted game was made public, and in December 2016, a fully completed version of the game was made available. As I mentioned, this is an action platformer where you take control of Pogie as he runs throughout, I'm guessing, some sort of candy-themed dream world. Your main objective is to find the exits in each level and advance to the next level. Contact with any creature in the game will cause Pogie to lose a life and restart at the last checkpoint. There are clown heads which shoot out candy, stars to collect extra lives, and fizzolas which cause Pogie to transform temporarily, making him much faster and allows him to take out other creatures. I find this game to be a bit strange. The controls are alright and very simple, but some levels have multiple exits and they could even be really close to the start of the level. And since I really didn't see any incentive to collecting every star or piece of candy other than increasing my score, I would usually just exit the levels as soon as I could. When playing as the normal Pogie, I would find myself being careful and try to collect every star I could, but as soon as I would transform using the Fizzola, I found myself just running through the levels at breakneck speeds, skipping any star that was just slightly out of the way, just not to waste the power-up. There are only 15 levels in the game, and I was able to beat this game in around 30 minutes. And this made me think, do people play platformers just to get to the end? Certainly there are speedrunner communities wherein the only goal is to get to the end of the game as quickly as possible, points be damned. And I wonder this because I wonder if there are people out there who try to finish a platformer with the highest score as possible. Because if there are, Dreamworld Pogie becomes a very different game, where you try to collect every star and piece of candy you can, and where you use the Fizzola transformation to eliminate every creature, rather than just focusing on running throughout the level just to get to the exit. I don't know, I don't think I could play the game that way. Platformers like this are usually more fun not worrying about scoring points. So that, combined with the short 15 levels, some major slowdown in some areas, no story to speak of, and generally the lack of anything interesting happening in the game, I'm gonna give this a rating of 3. I'll say this is just okay. Up next is the final standard adventure Dizzy game in the collection, and that's Mystery World Dizzy. This was yet another game planned for an NES release back in the 90s, but it never was released. Then, as part of Dizzy's 30th anniversary in 2017, the game's ROM was released as a surprise. The game itself is another remake of an earlier home computer title, and this time it's the third game in the series, Fantasy World Dizzy. The plot is that Dizzy and Daisy are out for a walk, a couple of trolls ambush them, Daisy is kidnapped by an evil wizard, and Dizzy is thrown in a dungeon. It's up to Dizzy to escape and rescue Daisy. This game winds up being a mix of the previous Dizzy games I've played in the collection. The plot is very similar to Dizzy the Adventurer. The inventory system reverts back to the single button pick up and use system like in the Fantastic Adventures of Dizzy. It also has the scrolling screens of that game as well. The game retains that one hit and you're dead of the other Dizzy games other than Fantastic Adventures, but at the same time it's a pretty simple and uncomplicated game like Dizzy the Adventurer or Wonderland Dizzy. It even has a casual mode like Wonderland Dizzy where you won't lose lives if you die. When I started playing I was a bit worried because Dizzy had been downgraded to only carrying 2 items at a time instead of 3. But it turns out that early in the game, you can find a satchel which will increase your inventory to 3, so it winds up being an interesting twist. Like the other Dizzy games, there are minor annoyances like having to wait for creatures to move out of your way so you can get by without touching them, and the limited inventory means you might have to run around the map trying to figure out where you left an item you might need, but that's all par for course with these Dizzy games, and I think changing these things might make the game too easy. And the Evercade save states certainly save a lot of headaches with these issues. There's not really much more I can say about this one. I found it fun and on par with most of the other Dizzy games, and since they all got a 5, this is gonna get a 5 as well. The last Dizzy-related game on the cart is another spin-off game, and this time it's Panic Dizzy, not to be confused with Dizzy Panic, which was a totally different game. This NES title was originally created in 1994, but it was not released. In 2019, a Kickstarter campaign was successfully funded to give the title a proper NES cartridge release, and a ROM for the game was released shortly thereafter. I was quite interested in checking this game out as it looked like a puzzler that played a lot like Data East's Magical Drop series, or like Money Puzzle Exchanger, wherein the blocks are descending from the ceiling and you control a character at the bottom of the screen, and it's up to you to grab, stack, and place the blocks in a position that will make them disappear off the screen. Panic Dizzy mostly plays like this in its 5 game variations. Those variations are 4 Suits, Match More, Dizzy Dice, Puzzle Path, and Picture Perfect. In 4 Suits, all of the blocks represent one of the 4 suits in a deck of cards: spades, clubs, hearts, and diamonds. Lining up the 4 different suits in any manner will make them disappear. In Match More, each block represents a different shape, and only by lining up 4 of the same horizontally will make them disappear. In Dizzy Dice, each of the blocks has 3 dots shown that will be shaped either diagonally, horizontally, or vertically. When 3 of the same types of blocks are aligned in the manner represented on those blocks, then they will disappear. Now, Puzzle Path is a game here that deviates from the norm because all you have to do here is create a path throughout the blocks on the screen, trying to eliminate them all. If a block has a 1 on it, passing it over once will cause it to disappear. If it has a 2, then 2 passes will cause it to disappear, and so on. You lose if you leave any blocks on the screen that you cannot reach while making your path. The last game is Picture Perfect, where an image is scrambled and you must pick up the pieces and replace them to unscramble the image within the time limit. Before you play each game, you select a character to use, and each character represents a different difficulty. The higher the difficulty, the bigger your score is multiplied when the game is over. I'll be honest here, I didn't really like most of these games. Trying to line up the different suits in 4 Suits feels counterintuitive, and most of the time I only succeeded on accident. In Match More, only matching horizontally makes combos less likely to occur, leading to quick game overs. Now, Dizzy Dice wasn't too bad, but it was weird to call them dice when only 3s show, and the horizontal and vertical versions of them aren't really what dice look like. And Puzzle Path feels a bit out of place here, and Picture Perfect can be difficult due to the graphical limitations of the NES. Also, the multipliers at the different difficulty levels seem way off. You could play it on the easiest skill level and play for quite a while, or you could play on the hardest difficulty, play for a fraction of the time, and literally get a game over in less than a minute, but still get a much higher score. I also thought it was really weird that all of the different games share the same high score. There is 2-player support, but since the Evercade doesn't support that, it's not an option. I'll say it again, I didn't really like this one. I'm going to give this a rating of 2. Super Robin Hood is the first of 3 non-Dizzy games on the cartridge I'll cover here, even though it is the last game listed on the cartridge itself. I wanted to do this game first because it was the first big hit the Oliver twins had made for home computers back in the 80s, predating even the Dizzy games. Here on the Evercade is the NES version of the game, which was originally released in 1991 as one of the 4 games included in the Quattro Adventure cartridge. The game has a very simple plot. As Robin Hood, you traverse through Nottingham Castle collecting the 48 treasures scattered about, and finish the game by rescuing Maid Marian. When I first started playing, I thought this was going to be a side-scrolling platforming game where you run and shoot through the level until you make it to the end, and it turns out it's not like that at all. Sure, as Robin Hood, you can run, jump, and fire arrows at your enemies, but there are no levels to speak of. It's just a gigantic maze-like castle that you need to navigate. Along the way, you'll collect treasures and keys. Collecting keys will unlock new areas, allowing you to explore more of the castle. Now, for some reason, I really like how Robin Hood moves in the game. As Robin Hood runs, he picks up acceleration, allowing for longer and higher jumps. But I really like how running and ducking allows him to slide along the floor, allowing him to access the areas where the pathway is too small to normally access. There's just something about it I found satisfying. I had a good time exploring the castle, but I did run across some issues. Now, I had no problem with most of the enemies and obstacles in the game, but I really didn't like the spikes that go in and out of the floors and ceilings. The reason is that they're completely hidden and you can't see them until they appear. The problem is that they can appear right where you're standing if you hadn't seen them before. I mean, that's how I had my first encounter with them. I was just standing there contemplating how I was going to proceed, and bam, I was taking damage and I didn't know why. Well, it turns out I was just standing right where a spike would come out. Another issue I had was how Robin Hood fires his bow. Don't get me wrong, in a normal situation, I like how it works. You push and hold the button down, and Robin Hood draws his arrow, and by releasing, he lets it fire. The problem is that when you're in a situation where you're ducking, and you only have a few moments to stand and fire and duck again before you get hit by something. It's a situation that happens quite frequently in the game. But in these moments, Robin Hood seems slower on the draw, and sometimes he'll try to be too fast and he won't fire at all. Lastly, I want to mention that just getting to the screen with Maid Marian isn't enough to win the game. You actually have to find and collect all 48 treasures before you can actually get to her. That actually frustrated me a bit, because I got to her missing only one of the treasures, and somehow it wasn't good enough for the game. Nope, the game expects you to backtrack through the whole castle and find that one item you missed. I mean, come on, game, can't you let me just have this one? Regardless, I had a really fun time playing this game, but due to a few quirks, I'm going to give this a 4 and just call it a good game. I'll talk about BMX Simulator next, only because the NES version, which was included in this collection, was also released as part of a compilation, and this time it was Quattro Sports. This one will be quick because there's not really much to talk about. This is a BMX racing game much in the style of Super Sprint or Super Off-Road. You race against two other bikers, and the controls are simply left, right, and accelerate. And this game is tough to get used to. Any object you hit throws you off your bike, which is fine, but I often feel like I don't have total control of the bike. The faster you go, the less of a turn radius you have, and sometimes it's tough to gauge how much you can turn at your current speed. It often feels like I should be able to make tighter turns than I'm actually able to. On top of that, depending on your terrain, your bike may get nudged one way or the other without your input, and it can really be tough sometimes to know how to react. The tracks are also very tight and littered with obstacles, and in the end, I was flying off my bike fairly frequently, which is something I actually found myself laughing at, but it won't help you win the race. Combine all that with the fact that you can't play multiplayer on the Evercade, and I think I've just talked myself into giving this a 2. I was thinking about giving this a 3, but then I think about the frustration of the game and it just bumps it down a notch. The last remaining game in the collection is Firehawk, and again this is the NES version, but this one actually did originally receive a standalone release. In this game, you're a helicopter pilot who's been sent to the fictional country of Lafia to run missions which basically consist of destroying as much stuff as you can while rescuing your comrades. The game plays in 2 parts. The first is a top-down view where you fly around destroying as much stuff as you can while searching for the people who need rescuing. The helicopter's bombing reticle helpfully indicates where those people are. When you do find them, the game switches to a mode where you have to fire left and right to ward off enemy choppers during the rescue. Complete the stage by returning to the carrier with the rescued. I couldn't really get into this game. I did think it was kind of cool that destroying stuff would sometimes give you power-ups, but they didn't carry over from level to level. In general, I just had a tough time controlling the helicopter, which made bombing targets very difficult, and I would just always repeatedly get hit by enemy fire. The rescue scenario was pretty interesting, but I always found myself using too much ammo, and when you run out of ammo, you're pretty much dead. I didn't find a way to replenish my stock either, as the only way I knew of to do that was to blow up buildings for ammo refill icons to appear, but you can't do that if you already don't have ammo. I thought that returning to my carrier would refill ammo, but it doesn't seem like I could land without achieving my objective. You also can't rescue anyone without ammo because you can't shoot down the enemies firing back at you. You're basically a sitting duck and will always die without ammo. Fortunately, spawning after losing a life will allow you to proceed with all the damage you've already inflicted, but you'll have to rescue everyone again.
I just didn't find the game that fun overall. But I can't say it's a bad game either, as I may be willing to go back and, try it again, because who knows, maybe I'm just missing something, and if something will just click and then I'll change my tune. But for right now, I'm on the fence, and I'm just going to give this one a 3 and say it's just okay.
And there you have it. That is all 11 games on this, the Oliver Twins collection. Certainly something you'd want to look into if you're into the whole adventure game as a side-scrolling platformer type of deal. I mean, to me, these were almost like those Sierra adventure games, the point-and-click ones, or the ones with keyboard inputs, but instead done in a platformer style. And it was something that was pretty much new to me. Of course, over in the UK, they've known about these style of games for some time, but to me, it was like brand new. And I felt that 4 out of the 5 games that were in that style, the mainline Dizzy games that are in this collection, were just really, really good. But overall, out of all 11 games, I felt that 4 of them were great. 2 of them were good. 2 of them were just okay. And 3 of them were kind of poor. I didn't quite like them so much. But yeah, like I said before, I mean, there's some really good games on here, especially if you like, adventure, puzzle, exploration type games, then this is right up your alley. And that's going to cover it for the Oliver Twins collection. Next time, we're going to be changing gears quite dramatically, as we're going to be looking at the Lynx Collection 1, which would be cartridge 13. So, yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.